Theology Podcast. My name is Scott Johnson. Now, I'm not a trained theologian, nor do I have degrees in theology or even the Bible. I'm just a regular guy who loves and follows God, but kind of wanted to know if there was more to what I was experiencing in the whole world of church. This podcast is the collection of a journey to dig much deeper into the realm of faith. And reality itself is kind of like the study of the do-over, and it's founded on the philosophy and principle of stopping and thinking, especially when it comes to what I know about God, Jesus, and ultimately what all of this has to do with me. A few days ago, I released a new mini talk video on YouTube where I discussed the idea that death is not natural. Now, we have it told to us in our world and culture that death is pretty much a natural part of life, just like birth. But unfortunately, that's just not true. Although death is a part of the life we now live, it was definitely not part of the original blueprint for humans when God created us. Death only became a part of our world as a result of human failure, which separated us from God and from this blueprint. And you might say that death was an unfortunate and nasty byproduct of failure, which is what we call sin. Not only came sin into our world, but along with it came loss and grief and sorrow and shame and guilt, all part of a big package, and quite honestly, a horrible package, if we're honest here. In the video, and I'll put a link to the video in the description of this episode, but in the video, I share the fact that I just recently lost my mom to cardiac arrest. It was very, very sudden and very, very unexpected. I've now lost both of my parents, and I kind of stand alone at the top of the generation totem pole. Those guys are no longer here. My parents are no longer here. I don't have access to them anymore. There are no more conversations, no more Thanksgivings, no more Christmases, birthdays, nothing. Which honestly leaves me with a very, very weird feeling and also in a very weird stage of life. Along with some of my very closest friends, I have and I am still experiencing this very weird stage, dealing with the loss of loved ones, and specifically in this situation, my parents. For this episode, I wanted to share a conversation that I had with one of my very good friends who is in the same boat as me. Dwayne Curry is a minister or pastor of Woodlawn Christian Church in Knoxville, Tennessee, and he's been in full-time ministry for like over 25 years. Dwayne lost his dad last year to cancer, who was my minister of my hometown church as a teenager. So Dwayne and I grew up together, kind of, and we went to the same college together. We've been very, very close friends for a long time. And I wanted to have this conversation with him to help share the feelings and thoughts from someone who has been around people in mourning as a minister for a long time and who has also experienced his own sense of loss and mourning. So this is the conversation that we had. Dwayne, first and foremost, right off the bat here, would you be willing to kind of talk about your dad and like how he died and what led up to that?
Sure. With me and my dad, of course, I've had a very good relationship with my dad over the years. Different people have different kinds of relationships with their dad. Of course, all that plays into your loss and grief as well. But, for me, my dad was always my hero. My dad, growing up, he was able to, he taught me a love for sports, and he even got to coach me a few times growing up and all those kind of things. And he was the kind of dad that you could look up to. And of course, he was a preacher, and he was a preacher that practiced what he preached. So there was no hypocrisy or anything that would drive you to question your faith or anything like that, or question him and his integrity. So just love my dad. Mm-hmm. And I got the opportunity to work with him. I went into ministry as well. So I was his youth minister for almost a decade and got to work directly with him. So I gained not I gained a
Which is
whole
pretty
new
rare.
relationship.
It's pretty
It
rare. Yeah.
is. I mean, some guys go into the family business, right? And they
Yeah.
work with their
Right.
fathers and
Right.
whatnot. And I think between me and Danny, I'm probably the one that, whatever business Dad was in, I could probably have gone into the family business and it'd have been fine. And Dad and I could have worked it well together. But
Yeah.
you have a good relationship as a kid, but then it's a whole different relationship when you're an adult. And so I learned a whole new side of my dad and had a whole different relationship with him. It was a working relationship, and it was a friendship, and it was a mentoring, and it was all of that.
Yeah.
And it was my dad. And so that made my loss even more and even harder. But um, but also there wasn't. I mean, I guess we can talk about this more in a minute. But it's like part of what goes into grief is maybe some things that are unresolved
Right.
and
Yeah.
left unsaid. I
Yep.
didn't have a lot of that. I
Yeah.
didn't have a lot of that. We said about everything,
Mm-hmm.
to each other over the years. But I had that opportunity. My siblings didn't
Mm-hmm.
have that opportunity. So I'm sure our grief looked a little different. But anyway, long story short, great relationship with my dad. And so just made it hard to lose him at 74. He's 74, almost 75 when he passed away a year ago, May. And he got stomach cancer and that cancer spread and affected his liver, and he actually ended up dying of liver failure, technically,
Okay.
and and all that comes with that. But that was hard. It was just hard to watch. He went into he did a I did a round of chemo, but chemo was terrible and about killed him. And then
Right.
just itself. And then he did immunotherapy
Mm-hmm.
and did several months of that and actually rebounded, seemed to feel better. They didn't cure him or anything or send it into remission, but it did seem to have an effect. And so he had several good months leading into the spring of 21,
Mm-hmm.
and even went back to work. He had retired from ministry several years ago. He started working at Chick-fil-A because he loved to just be around people, and people loved him.
Yeah.
And so he even went back to work and did that for a couple months, and then just kind of his body fell off the cliff because his liver was being affected.
Mm.
He started getting jaundice, and you're not
Mm-hmm.
cleaning out your body's not getting rid of the toxins and all that,
Yeah.
and then he stopped eating. And so that last month was just really hard. And of course, my mom had to bear the brunt of all that. But for me, I'm close. I live near my mom and dad, and my sister's about 45 minutes away. My brother's several hours away.
Mm-hmm.
And they came. They took turn. We all took turns, kind of helping with dad. But right after, when people were talking about, it, trying to be helpful and all that, and one thing I would tell them is like it was one of the most traumatic experiences of my life.
Yeah.
Just because it was so incredibly hard and painful to watch him die,
Yeah.
to literally waste away,
Yeah.
to kind of a skeleton of who he was, physically.
Mm-hmm.
And those are not the images I want to remember.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and all the things that go into helping give care to someone who's passing. He was in hospice care at home, so we were giving him, the care and just trying to relieve his pain. And he was in considerable pain towards the end. All that just is hard, just emotionally
Yeah.
wrenching,
Yeah.
physically tiring because it's 24-hour care towards the end. And so just physically, emotionally, spiritually tired, just exhausted. Yet a blessing in the sense of I got a chance to help him transition from this life to the next,
Mm-hmm.
to leave this world and enter the arms of Jesus. I got to be a part of that. And so there was something wonderful and transcendent about that. At the same time, something terrible and traumatic about it as well,
Yeah.
and
Still is what it is, right? It's not,
yeah.
it's
And
not
so you have all those memories. So there's all the good memories and all the traumatic memories, and all the bad with the good. But you had a lifetime of good, with my dad, with this just heart-wrenching end.
Yeah.
Um, and so all of that plays into kind of how I grieved, and well, I am still grieving,
Sure.
but yeah, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done, and it was one of the most transcendent things I've ever been involved in.
Yeah. Your experience with your dad's loss is different from mine. And you know this, and both my parents died. I mean, literally almost exactly the same way. They have this massive cardiac episode, which I know in my mom's case, we don't know about with my stepdad, Bob. They just called it a cardiac episode, which you're like, okay, well, what does that mean? But with my mom, it was definitely cardiac arrest, where it's just like the heart just stops, and it just stops. And, so it's not I would guess a lot of people would say, hey, if I, and my stepdad, Bob, did say this to me, he would say, when I go, I want to have something, massive heart attack, and I'm just here 1 second and gone, whereas your dad, when was he diagnosed with stomach cancer? A year before?
Yeah, so it was the spring of 2020.
Okay.
Yeah, so you had a year
So you
of
had
kind of
full year
waiting for this to happen. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, so it's, I mean, you're right. Death, it's hard no matter what, but, the agony of watching that play out, especially the last month, like you said, I can only imagine just how, just like you said, you have a mental picture. And when I saw your dad, when he was after his treatments and stuff, and he was working at Chick-fil-A, and I thought he looked pretty darn good, at that point.
Yeah.
And he still looked exactly, he's a grayer version, of what I remember growing up in high school.
Right.
But he still, looked pretty much like, Phil, so, but just the idea of seeing that, just, erode basically, I'm sure is awful.
Yeah. Well, and the other, there's good and there's bad. There's a blessing, and then there's the negative. There's the curse too. Someone who goes quickly, for them, it's great, right? Because that's how we all want to go quick. None of us want to suffer. If we're going to go, let's go quick. But it leaves everybody else hanging because it was so quick, and you didn't get a chance to say goodbye, and you didn't know what was coming and all that.
Yeah.
So in that sense, our year, and then even when he started going downhill, we knew it was the end. Like, we could talk to him, we could interact, we could say goodbye, and all that.
Sorry.
But yeah, and that's good. Like, hard, but good, because you got to say goodbye. You got to say those things. You knew what was happening. He got to say. You got to see him face his end. Like, he knew this is it, and he did it with such grace and still humor.
Right.
He was still funny. Towards the end, and he was halfway funny, halfway serious when you'd say, "Dad, what do you need? What can I do for you? What do you need?" And he said, "Just to die," because he was ready.
Yeah.
And we knew it. So there's good and bad. It's mixed, because sometimes you get a chance to say goodbye, sometimes you don't.
Right.
And so that was hard, really hard on him. He suffered towards the end. And yet, in a sense, good for us. We got to say goodbye.
Yeah.
And say everything we wanted to say. So
right.
It's just mixed.
It is. It's like you can't trade grief from grief. I mean, it is grief no matter what. It's loss, no matter what. Let me ask you this. In the video that I shared with you and stuff, I talk about how there's those like impulse moments, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but the question, and the question because you've seen it, but the question isn't, did you experience those moments of like, hey, let me text Dad real quick. Oh, wow. The question isn't, did you have those? It's not that. The question is, do you still have those? We're a year and a half out from your dad's death. Do you still have those moments where like those synapses, of like, hey, let me text, or the phone rings and you're like, oh, there's dad, or maybe I should call. Do you still have those?
Yeah. And I've heard people have them for decades. Like,
Yeah.
sometimes you always will, because it was such a big part of your life. And
Yes.
I do, early on, it's so, the reality of it is still right there, so thick
Mm-hmm.
that you don't have those
Mm-hmm.
moments right
Mm-hmm.
after. But then after a while, and you're back in your daily routine, and life is just kind of clicking along as normal. And then you have those moments like, oh, yeah, it's
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah.
Mine, a lot of them centers around things I think he would have found funny,
Right.
or politics. It's like, um, conversations I know we would have had, and especially sports. And so,
Mm-hmm.
watching something happen on TV, and it's that kind of moment, I would have texted him immediately
Yeah.
or called him immediately because of what just happened. And of course, in our favorite teams, whether it's the Kentucky Wildcats, and especially basketball, or the Dodgers. Dad was a big Dodgers fan,
Mm-hmm.
and so things would happen, and it'd be one of those things we would talk about. And now I don't. It's like
So it's gone.
it's gone. I don't
Yeah.
have that conversation,
Yeah.
and so it just brings it back
Uh-huh.
that he is gone.
Right.
Um, I found myself. I know I'm healing from the grief,
Mm-hmm.
because I cry less, right? And
Mm-hmm.
but those moments, and I don't necessarily even cry in those moments. It's just, yeah, the reality sits in again,
Yeah.
kind of a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And this, like, when my parents separated and divorced, and he came, I was on him for like months to come down here and spend time with me. And he like called me up, said, hey, I want to come down. I'm like, cool. And he says, yeah, I want to come down next week. I'm like, okay. And like he picked like, he's going to be in on like Monday through like Thursday. And I'm like, well, kids go to school. Robin goes to work. I work out of the house, but she goes to work. It's like, my thought was like, wouldn't it be better to come during the weekend? So like, everybody's available. Like during the day, no one is available. It was just he and me. But we watched a couple of old IU games. He helped me clear brush in the backyard. He washed all of our windows, which is something he did all the time. And I found it odd at the time, but when he left to go home, he went to his daughter's house in Tennessee, in Nashville, and before he went on back to Indiana. But at that point, I was like, wow, that's great. I got like this special time with him. It's just, because, 90% of the time is just the two of us,
Yeah.
and so, and after he left our house, it was like 5 days later, he passed away. And
Well,
I kind of felt like that same kind of thing like you had with your dad, that I got to actually have closure in a weird way. It was like a reverse, like
yeah, you didn't know it was at the
I had
time,
no
but you got it.
clue. Yeah. I didn't know it was closure at the time. But I think of him a lot with, like you said, IU basketball. We talked or texted after every game. So that's gone. With my mom, I call my mom every Saturday. And so Saturdays, I just can't imagine. That was why I wanted to ask you that. I was like, I just can't imagine not having that feeling. It's Saturday. I need to call my mom. Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So in the psychological world, there are the 5 standard stages of grief. These are the stages that we can find ourselves working through in an attempt to process change and adapt to any kind of change. Actually, they talk about, but
Right.
specifically here, we're talking about loss. So those are denial, which is avoidance, distracted, shock, numbness, confusion, anger, which is irritability, frustration, resentment, rage, bargaining, which can come out in ruminating over the future/past stuff, guilt, shame, blame. Depression, which is sleep, appetite changes, disinterest, sadness, crying, despair, helplessness, overwhelmed, feeling of overwhelmed. And then acceptance is the fifth one, which is being present in the moment, adapting, coping, validation, self comparison, and pride. I mean, a lot of these really hit home for me. Do any of these, where you're at right now, a year and a half away, specifically strike a chord with you when talking about dealing with the loss of your dad?
Yeah, well, I definitely think I'm getting on the further end towards acceptance. But definitely early on, I experienced all these in different ways. And probably just kind of who I am, my personality is the reason they were going to come out this way. But um, and I think sometimes we think, oh, you process through these one at a time. You first go through denial, then you go through anger, then you go through right. And what I found was I would backtrack and I would experience one, then another, and then you'd back up and experience it again. And so, like with me, I don't know. Um, whether it was denial or bargaining, but for a long, long time, and even still, some nights, my problem, I didn't sleep well, which is probably part of depression, but I had trouble sleeping for a long, long time, and
Hmm.
and I would play over and over in my mind, um, um, just the fact that he was gone,
Right.
or his just memories of him, or backtracking through the cancer and the what ifs, or if what if we'd have done this or done that or whatever.
Right.
um, and that may be part of the idea of bargaining, but I just would play that stuff over and over in my head, and then not sleep very well. But I don't know, there wasn't a lot of denial maybe up front when he first got diagnosed, but you lived with that for a year, and then you help him die. There's no denying what
Right.
happened.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's not
And
shock because
there's no,
you've seen
yeah,
it
it
coming
doesn't
for a
happen all
while.
at once. But you do feel kind of numb, and
Sure.
you are confused about what's going on, why it's going on,
Yeah.
or even what are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to say? And
Right.
all those things. I wasn't mad, but I did find myself being frustrated and irritable. Um, Part of that may have been lack of sleep, but I wasn't terrible to the people in my life, but I wasn't great either.
Hmm.
And I wasn't mad at God. I relied on God to get through, but I do realize here, almost a year, a little over later, that I prayed to God, I relied on God, and all that, and yet I went for a long period of time where it's like I refused. I didn't know I was doing this, but I refused to have my quiet time with God in the morning.
Hmm.
I just didn't want to hang out with Him, you know. And I think that was anger. I think that was subtle anger at God, and I didn't know I was angry, right? I'm just avoiding,
Yeah.
um, kind of a thing. And and those were the biggest ones for me. I think a long term, like depression. I do think I was depressed. You're just sad. You're not yourself. You're all those things. But that's kind of dad passed in 21. He was diagnosed in, I think, March, April of 20. And we had already been through a pretty rough year for me in ministry. 2019 was fairly rough with different things going on, to the point that we got to the start of 2020, and I said, I literally prayed, Lord, I can't handle anything else right now. That was January. February, COVID.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
March, everything shuts down,
Right.
and then Dad is diagnosed with cancer. And it was like, okay, I guess I'm supposed to handle a few more things.
Right.
And so I was struggling already, and then all that. Yeah. And so my grief took me, even so deeper into kind of a bad place. Just depression and isolation for me was a big thing. I just kind of isolated myself
Yeah.
and insulated myself. I
Yeah.
thought
Yeah.
I was dealing with it well and
Hmm.
talking about it and whatever. I thought Tia and I walked through it well together. She told me this probably just been a few weeks ago, um, because she heard me processing with somebody else about grief, and she said, I I didn't get to grieve with you. I don't know how you felt. I don't know how you went through it. And I
Hmm.
thought I did, but I didn't. She hadn't, we
Right.
didn't process it together.
Yeah.
Um, and I wasn't all that open. I kind of just kept it all in. And so, which
Hmm.
wasn't, which wasn't good.
Yeah. Wow. Uh, yeah, I think for me, the biggest thing with since I'll talk about my mom mainly because it just happened a couple months ago, but obviously the shock was, I mean, I can definitely say that the denial thing for me was very, very real, um, very real. And even I think still even now because people obviously they ask how you doing, man, how you doing, and that's great. But I feel like it's like I'm just like a recording and I'm saying the same thing over and over and over because I'm lesser in shock, but I'm still in shock that my mom lived all the way across the country in Arizona, and I did not get to say goodbye. She had texted me that day. I did not get to reply to her text. And so, there's the shock of that. And then also the, kind of beating myself up a little bit, about, um, and maybe that's the anger part, maybe angry with me. Um, it's stupid, right? It takes 5 seconds to reply to someone in a text. That's stupid. That's stupid. I couldn't take 5 seconds to do that. That's
Yeah.
dumb. That's dumb. I had a lot of that, but still, I still think the shock thing is still a part of what I'm dealing with, and also just kind of like what you said, like you had a year to at the very least say, hey, let's if we're not good, let's get good, you know.
Right.
And my relationship with my mom was not great. I literally a week before shared that with you guys at our little retreat, that
Yeah.
things were not great. And I just was really frustrated with decisions she had made. And so I'm still reeling from that of not being able to, there are no more conversations to be had.
Right.
Um, but Robin did say like, well, it's not like you didn't try. You did. You actually had lots of conversations with your mom. She just didn't really listen. So, you know, so that was good. Let me ask you this. This is probably the one thing when people ask me how you're doing. This is probably the one thing that is hardest for me. Um, Now that I have both my parents gone, and I kind of said at the beginning of in the intro that I'm at the top of the generation totem pole right now. There's nobody above me. And that is a freaky,
Yeah. Yeah.
freaky feeling. I know you still have your mom, but your dad, as you said, he was the hero of your family. You're absolutely right. He was a preacher that actually practiced what he preached. Um, do you feel that? Do you feel that like that strong, massive amount of responsibility of this torch being? You know that it's coming, but it's like you're never really, obviously you're never ready
Yeah.
for it. But do you feel that? Do you feel this like huge responsibility?
I do. I mean, I think it's for multiple reasons because you kind of drift into new seasons of life, and those seasons are different, and whatever. And so, like same year, just before I lose my dad, I become a grandpa, right?
Right.
And that's new. That's different. That's like what? This is weird.
Because you're
Because
still
we
a
kind of
young
still,
buck.
yeah, you still see yourselves as the kids. You're not, you're not young. You still got kids of your own, but you're still
Right,
in the
right.
young generation.
Yeah,
And then there's your
absolutely.
parents' generation and the older generation and whatever. And it's like, wait, we're getting there.
Hmm.
Um, and then like with me, so I still have my mom, but now my relationship with my mom, at least in the ways we function, are changing. In that now I'm more of a caregiver.
Yeah.
Um, and whereas she used to be our caregiver, and then our relationship was more they took care of themselves, we took care of ourselves and our kids and whatever, but we still, and your mom's always your mom, so she's always kind of still looking out for you, but now it's like now she need like I have to do certain things because she can't do them,
Hmm.
and I'm becoming the caregiver.
Yep.
in a lot of ways. And it's almost like the relationship's shifting. Not that she's a child, but I have more of a parental role with her
Yeah. Yeah.
now
Right.
too.
Yep.
And it's just so strange and
Yeah.
so weird. And of course, we will go through all those things in different ways, but it is the seasons of life that you go, I knew it was coming, but it's weird when you get there.
And it's quick.
And it happens in a hurry. Like,
Yeah.
people, it's something that us old people say,
Right.
people always told you how quick life goes, and you just kind of roll your eyes, and then
Yeah.
you're there, and you're
Yeah.
like, yeah,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, I
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah. And now the young people roll their eyes at me and you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So a big question for me, and you've seen this question, but I don't know the answer. You're first of all, how long have you been in full time ministry? I'm trying to guess. I did want to
So
really
it's 29
compare
years.
this. Okay.
29.
In the intro, I said at least 25, but
Yeah.
wow. Okay, so you've had 29 years of full time ministry. And as most people probably just already, guess at or imagine, it's like preachers typically are the ones that do the weddings. They preach sermons, they do the weddings, they do the funerals, blah, 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 blah. But that is a big part of what a minister does is trying to help console people through life. And obviously death is a part of that. How has that been different for you, having all that time of experience helping people through their stuff, and then all of a sudden now you're in the middle of it.
Yeah. Well, and of course, as you go through your early years in ministry, like I was a youth minister for a lot of years, so you're not
Mm-hmm.
dealing with a lot of death and doing a lot of the funerals. And
Right,
so,
right.
I mean, it's still there, still around you. You
Yeah.
may participate in some way, but it's not on your shoulders to really help people
Right.
grieve unless something happens in your youth group. But so I've had not necessarily 29 years of experience with grief, but certainly over the last decade or so, done so much more. When you go through it yourself, um, I mean, I've always had a heart for people, compassionate, trying to help them through grief. I think, honestly, I've done a decent job. But you look back and go, wow, yeah, I could have done so much better, because I know that's not helpful. I know
Right,
now
right. Yeah.
that that's not helpful at all,
Yeah.
because it didn't work for
It did
me.
not work. Yeah.
I'm not going to do that, next
Yeah.
time. So,
Yeah.
although I think most people give you a pass for all those cliches and things that you say that's trying to be helpful, they're in a better place, and
Right.
all those kind of things. We know where they are and whatever. Those are true.
Right.
Just not very pastoral in the moment.
Yeah.
And people said all those kind of things to me too, and I didn't get upset. I'm not offended by it. It's like, it is true. You're right, and you're trying
Sure.
to be helpful. So I hear
Right.
your
Right.
heart,
Yep.
kind
Yep.
of thing. But a lot of that's not really helpful. And the other thing is, you can try to identify with people's grief, but everybody grieves differently. Everybody's loss is different. Everybody's relationship is different. So it's
Yeah.
not really helpful to tell someone, I know exactly how you feel,
Mm-hmm.
because you don't know exactly how you
No.
feel. And the first thing that pops in their mind is, no, you don't.
Right.
And but to say that you understand,
Yeah.
and kind of, as they talk, to go, I understand what you're saying, and I hear what you're saying, or repeat what they're saying. And just, most people, if you can need to talk, and if you can get them to talk through and vent and just release some of that, they just want to be heard. And that's the main thing. So the thing I walk away with is, most people just want to be heard, about what they're feeling, what they're going through, and just be, validated that that's okay. Like, this is normal. This
Mm-hmm.
is this is okay to feel this way. This is what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
As you're grieving, grief is normal, and your feelings are normal, and all those kind of things.
Yeah.
Without, um, without kind of mitigating what they're going through, or trying to help them along, to get over it. That's one of the myths, is you can just get over it. if you just ignore it, or if you just give it enough time, or if you
Mm-hmm.
right,
Yeah.
if you just determine you're going to grieve, you're going to be strong. You're just going to be strong for everybody, kind
Yeah.
of thing. It's like, well, you're not going through it then. You're just going around it, which means it's just still there.
Yep.
And so you got to go through it. It's no fun. You feel how you feel. Most people are like, I just want to feel better again. And so you kind of pretend your way to being better. It's like, no, you're just going to have to go through this.
Yeah.
The only way better is through it, which means you're going to have to feel bad for a while. And I think that's the biggest thing I've learned, just experiencing it myself, to go, you know what, I'm going to have to be better at helping people as they go through this stuff too. Most of us just want to stuff it. Most of us, let's get busy. If I can stay busy, I won't think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it just means you're putting it off.
Right. Yeah.
It's still out there.
Yeah. That's
It's
definitely
still
the
in
form
you.
of denial there for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can just stay busy enough or whatever. I know that for me, I have experienced a couple of, like you had said about in youth ministry, because I was in youth ministry for a long time as well, that, but you definitely don't deal with it on a daily basis by any means, or weekly basis, a monthly basis, or annual basis most of the time. But when it does happen, it's it can be pretty big and whatever. But I have a friend of mine, and I talk about it a lot. And I said that when I was in Indianapolis area, we had a girl in the youth group. She was eighth grade, and her dad had committed suicide. He had killed himself
Mm.
shot himself with a gun. Wrote a letter and did it right before he was going to work and whatever. And obviously everybody was blown away and devastated. And they called
Yeah.
me and said, "Hey, she's asking for you." And if I hadn't gone through a couple of years earlier an actual death of one of our kids, I probably would have done exactly what you said. I would have went over there and tried to say a bunch of stuff. But I went over to this girl's house. Her mom and her grandma were there, and she's sitting on the couch. I went over to her on the couch. I put my arm around her. She put her head on my shoulder, and she just cried on my shoulder for an hour.
Yeah.
I didn't say a word.
Yeah.
And I mean, of course you're thinking to yourself, well, what would you say? I mean,
Yeah.
there's nothing to say.
No, but she will always remember your presence.
Yeah. Right.
You didn't even need to say anything.
Nope.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think, the whole video thing that I shared with you, the idea of death is not natural. And that's why it's so weird. And that's why it hurts so bad. And that's why it's so strange. And that's why that's why there's 5 stages to grief. It's, it ain't easy. It's definitely not easy. And, it is something we all experience, and hopefully we can, learn from our own experiences. And like you said, to be able to somehow be there for somebody else as they go through it.
Yeah. And I was thinking, some of the things that we can say that could come off as cliche, about he's in a better place and all those kind
Yeah.
of, it, when we're the ones thinking it, because we believe it, and not because just someone's saying to us to be nice, it does make a difference, because you're like, I truly believe this life is not the end. This isn't all there is. And that helps you through. And then even being mad at God or those kind of things, it's like God is working towards an end, and He is going to make things right. In fact, He is making things right. Helps me to trust Him more and go, I know this life's rough, and our exit can be really rough, but this ain't it. And we're not home, and we're waiting to be home. And all those things are a powerful, powerful healing thing, when we truly believe it, and it's not just words.
Well, that was the end of our conversation. And I definitely want to thank my good friend Dwayne for his time and for his willingness to share. And it's not easy to talk about things like this. And it's definitely not easy to put yourself kind of out there, to be willing to be vulnerable and transparent to people that you don't even know. So I'm super grateful. I hope that this quick conversation can be an encouragement to you or anyone who currently finds themselves in this very, very strange and very, very weird situation of dealing with loss. But just know that it isn't the end of the story, like Dwayne said. It might feel that way. There's for sure, it's probably going to feel that way, but it's not. And while we wait for the rest of the story to unfold, trying to process stuff like this while we live, I hope that you can be encouraged that God understands. He totally gets it. And He's waiting to hug you through the pain and honestly to hold your hand as you walk on. If you're interested in continuing this conversation and many others, there's an online community that I'm a part of people who are looking to encourage one another, pray for one another, love one another through everything that life brings. You can simply go to the Rheology website, which is rheologylife.com, and at the top you can click Messiah People, and that'll let you know some more information. Thanks again for listening.